Welcome everyone to the Monterey Peace and Justice Center. I'm Catherine Crockett, board president of the Monterey Peace and Justice Center. I have board members here, Celia Shee, Cindy Ramsden Scott, Judy Karras, Lynn Hamilton, and we all welcome you. Tonight's event is sponsored by the Monterey Peace and Justice Center, Veterans for Peace, Chapter 46, the Peace Coalition of Monterey County, and Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, Monterey County branch. To be informed about events here and around the county, you can sign up to receive the peace calendar. There are forms on the table by the door, and you can also find it online at peacecentral.org. The center is staffed on Wednesdays. You can drop in between 1 and 5:30 and browse our living library or just have a conversation and look at the bulletin board or see what we're up to here. Dr. Sharat is a political economist at the San Jose Peace and Justice Center. He writes and lectures on global political power, social movements, and human rights issues. He's also affiliated with Initiative for Equality and Human Agenda, and he is a movement artist. Dr. Lin offers facts, analysis, and insights on world issues, often with first-hand knowledge. He's been on the front lines of some epic moments in history: the Cultural Revolution in China, Palestinian West Bank and Gaza during the early years of occupation, Nicaragua and the Sandinista Revolution, Egypt during the Arab Spring Uprising, and he happened to be studying at UC Santa Cruz and UC Berkeley during the late 60s and early 70s at the height of the Vietnam War protest. Please help me give Sharat Lin a warm welcome.
Thank you, Catherine, for that generous introduction. And I'm always thrilled to be back at the Monterey Peace and Justice Center. And thanks to all the co-sponsors for having me again. I always enjoy coming and speaking to you folks. And now today, I'm to speak on the reflections on the student movement. So I really, and this is running from the Vietnam War to the assault on Gaza. And we're reflecting on student movements because the students have played such an important role, and particularly in the recent months, a really key focal point of the protests against the Israeli assault on Gaza, and more broadly the Israeli occupation of Palestine, because that's the context, that's the historical context and the root cause of this issue. And the Vietnam War was also a war where students took the lead and mobilized in an enormous way, and they were ahead of the rest of the country, you could say. But that has not always been the case. There have been a lot of movements in between where students have not led, and I think it's worthwhile to at least ponder, why and under what circumstances students have led, and under what circumstances other segments of the society have led the movements. And this is one talk. This is probably the first time I'm coming here giving a talk without having done a lot of preparation. So I'm just going to, first of all, it's a shorter talk than usual. I will try to confine my comments to about 35 minutes, although I usually run long, but that's my goal. Before I get started, I'm going to, I'm just going to share a few slides with you, and then I'm going to turn off the projector. And what I'm going to do in these slides is just give you a glimpse of some of the student movements that I encountered in my student days, that sort of set me off on this course. I became politicized by these student movements, and you may be just kind of interested to see what I experienced and why I was inspired by them. Okay, so I'm going to start the slideshow, but before I do, I just wanted to share with you. I was doodling yesterday, and during the debate, just getting bored of the lies. I mean, one was lying more than the other, but they were both lying, and how pathetic that we have a debate, and these are our choices, and the people who could really be good presidents are totally excluded. The three candidates who have a brain and a proper conception of what's going on are systematically excluded from the presidential debate. Okay. So my talk today is as we all know, is about the student movements, and so I became the first time that I was witness to and was involved in a student political movement was when I was at UC Santa Cruz. And so this photograph is October 1968, and there was a regents meeting on the Santa Cruz campus, and I was at Crown College. I was a science student. This was Crown College, and in those days, the regents used to what they would do is they would rotate their meetings around the different campuses, and this meeting, you'll see why, was a watershed. Anyway, it was a meeting where the Governor Ronald Reagan came, just UNRRA Speaker of the Assembly came, so a lot of the bigwigs of the California state government were there, and we the students were there to give a Reagan and the others a protest welcome, you could say a quote-unquote welcome. And there were anarchists there, but there were all kinds. And then this fellow with the bald head in the middle is Deanie McHenry, the first chancellor of the UC Santa Cruz. These are the students just swarming the plaza. So the actual regents meeting took place in the so that building that you see in the background is the dining hall in Crown College, and you see here's the actual regents meeting. I recognize the lights in the dining hall, and it was actually open. Can you believe this? It was actually open. Students could walk in and out, and Reagan was sitting there. The person on the far right was Charles Hitch, president of the university, and we saw the whole thing. But after the meeting, the students swarmed the students were respectful because they allowed the meeting to go on, and then at the end they swarmed the place, and it may have, I don't remember whether they interrupted the end and it had to be prematurely terminated, but this was a watershed moment because the regents would after this incident in 1968 would seek to meet away from the major campuses, and which would include some of the non-campus sites that UC owns, and then recently. The recent meeting, of course, in UC Merced, they picked the least political university, the one that's actually the least accessible to hold a meeting. So they try to avoid the possibility of protest. But these are all the students who actually came into the dining hall and just swarmed the regents meeting. Shouting the regents down, and the reason there are a number of issues. 1968. It's not so much the war; it's more about things like tuition hikes, like freedom of speech, demands beginning. This is just the very beginning of demands for ethnic studies, and so there were a number of issues that students were asking for. There's no single issue at this point that was dominant, but they were asking the regents to listen, and then it was not until 1969 that the war became a central issue, and so this was a picket on the Hagar Drive, which is the west entrance of the campus, and this is the first time that we see students carrying signs. Notice that in '68 there was a huge number of students, but they didn't have any signs, and that would be very unusual today, because signs have become very much a part of our political culture, because it's a way of projecting the issues that we stand for and what we're demanding. And here they're carrying signs, and actually some of these signs were printed by the silkscreen process, which formed the basis of the collection of which I am the curator, the Art of Protest. And so that collection, that original collection of 26 posters, was from this era, from the Vietnam War era, from UC Santa Cruz and UC Berkeley. And recently there's been an explosion of silkscreen printing because of in protest against the assault on Gaza. And so we have expanded the collection to something like 150 posters now, so I'd love to bring it back to the Monterey Peninsula. Anyway, and then this is the main entrance to the university on McLaughlin Drive, and I was photographing, but I was also a participant in these protests, and this was the time of the first big student strike in UC Santa Cruz. Now, the student strikes didn't start in '69; they actually started in '68, and the most notable campus for that, of course, as many of you know, was San Francisco State University. San Francisco State University's their strike began in 1968. It lasted for 8 months. It doesn't mean that students didn't go to class, but the general strike, continued for 8 months. It was the longest student strike in U.S. history. Okay, so that's all I have for UC Santa Cruz, and so all the other campuses. This was a very dynamic period where there were these meetings, and we needed places to meet on campus, to plan, to get information. So in those days, because there were no cell phones, news actually came. A lot of news actually came by couriers. So a student would have visited UC Berkeley and was just arriving, and they would come to the mass meeting and give a report on what's happening at UC Berkeley. And these mass meetings went on for hours and hours. In fact, it constrained the places where these meetings would take place. So the largest indoor meeting place that was open and available to students for the longest period of time were the dining halls. Each college had a dining hall in those days, and that dining hall, from after dinner to before breakfast, that was the longest period of time. And so a lot of these meetings began around 9:30, 10, and would last until 3 and 4 in the morning. Okay, and at 3 in the morning there still would be 200 or 300 students in there. And that was how much energy was there during the peak of the strike at UC Santa Cruz. And so I was very inspired, very energized by it too. I also learned some very hard lessons, and one of them was dealing with the press. And so I remember there was a demonstration that was in the town of Santa Cruz, and the media, picked someone because they wanted to interview someone. They picked me, and I said, are you consent to being interviewed? I said, yeah, okay. And maybe the second question was, it wasn't a trick question, but I didn't know how to answer the media, because it's kind of a loaded question. So the loaded question was, is there any possibility of violence? And I said, yes, but we don't intend to, the students have no plan for violence, there's nobody who favors violence. So that when it was broadcast, it was yes, and the butt was cut off. So I learned my lesson.
And learn from it.
UC Santa Cruz was supposed to be the protest-proof campus. That's the way it was built, right? With the 7 colleges, divide and conquer.
Yeah.
Well, that didn't work. It only worked for a while, right?
Yeah. But in a way, that isn't true, because that may have been the intention, but it was probably the most residential campus of all the 9 campuses at that time, and students who live there, they have more freedom and time to
stay until 3
a.m. To stay and mobilize. And of course, the downside is that UC Santa Cruz was the campus that was probably the most isolated from a city. And so a lot of the protests happened on campus, and only the campus knew about it. And it was only when we either took the protest down into Santa Cruz, into the town, or else there were other protests that were organized by members of the community. For example, I still remember one in San Lorenzo Park. It was the Vietnam moratorium, 1970, and so that was one of the cases where students and community came together. Okay, so I'm not going to go into, I didn't bring any photos of my student experience at UC Berkeley, because you probably have seen a lot of that, and you're probably familiar with it, a lot of you being activists. But I am going to just show you, I did some of my schooling at the American University in Beirut, Lebanon. And just yesterday, as I was looking through the photos, I discovered this photo that I don't even remember. But it is, so I'm the one on the far right. So I was a medical student at the American University of Beirut, and it was, I went there, partly because it had a good medical school, but also because I had an interest in learning more about the Middle East, and this was the perfect opportunity to do both. And so I went there, and so part of the context is that Beirut itself, I'm not even talking about the south of the country, or the Bekaa Valley, which is the inland valley. But even Beirut, particularly southern Beirut, there are a number of Palestinian refugee camps, and these are refugees both from 1948 and also from 1967. And this is just to give you some flavor for the condition of the camp. So it's not tense. There enough years have passed that people have built houses out of brick, but it's very irregular construction, and of course, you know, if you look at this camp now, it's all built up, it's all high-rise or mid-rise. But anyways, so there were a lot of these Palestinian refugee camps in the outskirts of Beirut, and the only thing that the Lebanese army or the Lebanese military was ever used for, was never used against Israel because it was hopelessly overpowered, and I mean they had you know, aircraft that go back to the Second World War, and even before that. That's how outdated they were. And the only thing that the Lebanese military was ever used for was to bomb the Palestinian refugee camps. You know, when there was an uprising. Yeah, I used to see, I could go to the top of my dorm and look out, and I could see the planes dropping bombs, and I could see the smoke rising from the Palestinian refugee camps. And because of that, the students at the American University of Beirut, you know, mobilized, and this student strike, you know, took place in April, and well, so this is an assembly, and you see the students. This is the I got there, and I thought. And there were other people who said the same thing. This is probably, you're going to encounter probably the best dressed student body in the world. And they know how to dress quite well. And they come, you know, for the most part from elite families. But they go to a university and see what's happening. And it doesn't take very long for them to realize that there's something wrong with these policies and what's happening. And you know, they are mobilizing for social justice. So this is a student strike that took place at the American University of Beirut, and this wall is the boundary of the campus, and the campus is right next to the ocean, or rather the Mediterranean Sea, so there was a rally in the campus, and people flowed out into the street, and then before long there was a confrontation with not the police, it was the army. So because the Lebanese police are very weak, and if they want to deal with any kind of unrest, they bring out the army. So once again, the army is not used against foreign enemies, it's used for internal security reasons. And pretty soon you got the army, you know, firing tear gas, and this was my first taste of tear gas. And you know, there were some protesters setting some fires in the streets, but this was sort of the situation here, and you see the army with the armored vehicles, and then the government officials there, you know, coordinating and consulting with the army as to what to do next. And then here you see some soldiers on the rooftop across the street. This is a Robles, and this guy is, I poked my camera out the window and he's aiming at me. This guy. Yeah, it's scary. So that's all I have for that. But I wanted to give you a flavor for this you know, the student strike at the American University. The other thing that happened that I didn't bring the photos for, but I'll mention it just because it was one of those really historic events, and that is that a few days after this, there was a, I believe it was April 12th, there was an Israeli commando raid into the heart of Beirut, and what they did is they killed three Palestinian leaders, Kamal Adwan, Kamal Nasser, and one other, and it shocked the nation that a country like Israel could penetrate into a sovereign country of Lebanon and assassinated Will. And so the next day there was a protest in the streets of Beirut. And Beirut at that time, so Lebanon at that time had a population of 3 million, and Beirut, the capital city, had 750,000 population. So there were as many people in the streets that next day as the entire population of Beirut. And so it was an unprecedented mobilization. 1/4 of the country was in the streets in Beirut itself. And the media, the Lebanese media, were so scared of the risk of violence because there are militias. There are militias that freely operate in Lebanon at that time. And some of these were Palestinian militias, some of them were Syrian militias, some of them Lebanese militias, both right and left. You know, the Phalange have their right-wing militias. And because the tension was running high, and there were a lot of fears. The media was reporting, you know, and saying that there are fears of violence. They refused to send their cameramen into the protests on the street. So the next day, the newspapers had photos. All of them were taken from high up from the surrounding buildings. And I said, I'm going to take my camera down into the streets. And my friend said, yeah, we'll help you do that. So I did, and I got the photographs from street level of what was going on. And indeed, there were militia members in the streets carrying automatic weapons. And but it was peaceful. There was, you know, nobody was killed that day. But that was sort of my introduction to it from a student perspective, from a student movement perspective. At UC Berkeley, of course, I mean, one of the reasons why I chose to go to UC Berkeley was because of its politicization, because of the political movements. And you know, I got there, first time I got to UC Berkeley was in 1970, and so that was already 1 year after the People's Park, and but still there was so much going on, and I was still so this spring of 1970 at UC Santa Cruz was even bigger than 1969. Why? Because that was the Nixon's invasion of Cambodia, right? And then when I went to Berkeley in the summer, there was a big poster making workshop that was held in Worston Hall, the School of Architecture and Environmental Design, and that poster workshop generated about 60% of the original posters of the art of protest. So that was another inspiration, was the beautiful artwork that was created out of this. And I've had a lot of discussions about art and creativity, and people, other artists, confirming what I've always, you know, said is that you know, students are a source of immense creativity, but that creativity, that art, is inherently revolutionary. This is what some other people have said, and I've always said that, you know, art is something, you know, movement art. You see movement art in the left, you don't see it on the right, and it's because you're creating something new. You're not going back to the past, and so art. I believe there really is a connection between art, creativity, and looking to the future, and revolutionary change. So anyway, now there are a lot of other wars that have taken place in between the Vietnam War and the assault on Gaza, and you know, what is interesting about the current assault on Gaza and the protest response to it is that this is one that is both the community and the students. And then in this last phase with the encampments, the students clearly took the limelight and really energized the movement. But it's a little bit different now because now there is a community, and this community of activists is, I'm talking about outside of the students, is there. This is a legacy of the early movements for the protests against the Vietnam War, the civil rights movement protests. Okay, these have created a heritage of protest in this country that did not exist or was not manifest before the Vietnam War. Of course, the other reason is because what preceded the civil rights movement was the McCarthy era and the total ban on protest during the Second World War. The Sedition Act was used to crush protest during the Second World War, and so there was the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War movements were about recovering our right to protest, recovering our freedom of speech. But what about the anti-war movements in between? What about other movements in between? And we see that if you look at the wars in between, we have the 1990, 1991 Gulf War, 1991 war, but the protest started in December of 1990 because the president was, for Bush #1 was talking about going to war, and there were a number of months where he was building up to it. He was going around the world trying to convince other world leaders to join his coalition, and so the protest started before the war actually happened, and sometimes those were actually the largest protests. Why? Because people go out into the streets when two conditions are met, actually three, but the two main ones are the same concepts that motivate people to migrate, and that is that there is a push and a pull. You have to have a push and a pull. So the push is that there's something happening that is so extraordinarily wrong, or needs to. We need to mobilize because this is simply outrageous. So people are motivated to mobilize. That's the push. But the pull is that if you mobilize, do you have a hope of succeeding? Okay. So if you mobilize before a war starts, most people think, there's a reasonable chance that we can stop this war before it starts. And after the war starts, it's very hard. I mean, we've already experienced that, in Vietnam, and we couldn't stop it except after so many years, and then to so many deaths, right? So many American deaths. I mean, that was the 50 plus thousand American deaths was what was heard here. Nobody really talked about the 3 million Vietnamese deaths. So that's why we had such numbers. And I still remember that march in December 1990 in San Francisco on Market Street. And I was going up there to try to meet some of my friends, and we could never meet because the crowd was too large. We were in the same location, but we couldn't find each other. And in addition to the students, this was something that was really led by the community, members in the community, because we, the baby boomers and the people who followed us, now had this experience with anti-war protests, right? And then the same thing with the 2001, the war in Afghanistan. There wasn't too much. It was really the war in Iraq, 2003. So there was another protest before the war started. In I think it was December of 2002, before the Iraq war started. That was a very big march, and then there were a number of them, before it started on March 16th, I think, of 2003, and these really came, more from the community, and I think because there are people in the community, some of who are starting to get older, who had the experience as peace activists or anti-war activists, going back to the Vietnam War time. And the students and the young people were more interested in what became more motivated by those issues that were more directly affecting them. So on campus it was about tuition hikes, it was about continuing demands for ethnic studies, dealing with new issues like student homelessness, and so these issues were there. But the other ones were the ones about race. So the Trayvon Martin case. So 2013, we have young people mobilizing, and what we see is that there's a certain disconnect that was happening here, because the older folks who went out in the anti-war protests were not joining them. I would see these protests of young people, and by 2014 it was Black Lives Matter, and then of course 2020 we had the George Floyd protests, led by young people and supported by older folks. But the older folks were really not there to the full extent that I was hoping, and this continues to this day in the sense that we have young people organizing for certain issues, but they're not coming to places like this, like the Peace Center. We in San Jose, in Palo Alto, we have the same issue, that the leaderships of the Peace Centers are aging, and the young people are not integrating themselves into these peace centers to continue the work of these peace centers. But what we did in San Jose was, because we have a place, we could provide the space for these other organizations, so the younger people would have their own organizations, and they would organize in that space, and so that is the way that we cooperate. So, in essence, what I'm saying is that there are some complex factors as to when students mobilize and when they do not, and when there are others, the older folks in the community who are mobilizing on anti-war issues. This is not necessarily the issue that most drives or motivates the young people. Gaza is something different, right? Because young people can look at their phones and see in real time a genocide unfolding before their eyes, and it's so flagrant, it's so obvious, it's so clear what's happening. The evidence is so overwhelming, and yet U.S. policy is just blind to it, and so they have mobilized, and it's it's a breath of fresh air because even though the circumstances are very depressing, you know, this is the first time that we're seeing major mobilizations on the issue of Palestine. I remember the 1967 war. You know, when I would listen to the news, I would see the New York Times. I was just in, you know, high school at the time. But I could see that there was a disconnect between the news that we were getting. It's not that the news, there was a news blackout, you know, in favor of Israel. Some of the news was getting in. It was enough to assemble a picture of what was going on and the fact that an occupation was taking place. And also to see the historical context of this. And where I said, you know, this is the policies are all wrong. You know, I see the news and the policies don't match the news. And I felt alone because there was nobody else. There's no one else whom I could turn to who would see my viewpoint. And today that's you know, it's a vast turnaround. I mean, in the sense that, I mean, there are polls that show that a majority of Americans think that the what is happening in Gaza is something, you know, on the order of a genocide. That doesn't mean that they are automatically opposed to Israel or the Zionist project, but you know, it's a very dramatic change. And I remember even much later, you know, I had a kafiyeh because I, you know, spent a lot of time in the Middle East, and when there was a protest, there were no other people didn't have kafiyehs. Now, if you go to a protest, you know, 90% of the people have kafiyehs. So there's a lot more awareness today of this issue. And you know, it's tragic that maybe it takes a genocide for this kind of awareness to happen. Of course, it's been building up for a long time, but to get this kind of mobilization, sometimes something really drastic has to happen before you know, people will mobilize or get motivated to take on this issue in a serious way. But the students have done a marvelous job. I also have some critiques, you know, because, for example, the encampments captured our imagination. They put the students in the headlines around the world, not just in the U.S. But there also are some cons to that because one of the problems was that the encampments were on university property, which is, I mean, it's not always private property, but the universities exercise the right of private property to so-called private property to invoke trespassing charges and other things. And because of that risk of being arrested for being in the encampments, a lot of the encampments became closed off. They would have, you know, signs saying no photos, and then advising other students don't talk to the media. And you know, I felt that was an unfortunate, you know, cutoff of communications, because what we need to do is we need to be communicating to the outside world why we're doing this. And so, you know, in some sense, I feel that, you know, you have to look at some of these things and look at the trade-off between capturing attention and communicating what you stand for. And you know, maybe the compromise is to have an encampment and just to get the headlines, because after you set up the encampment, it's old news, right? So you might as well dismantle the encampment and then, you know, make a big push to communicate your message to the media and to the public. But these are some of my just sort of informal, you know, observations of student movements. over the period of my life. And I think I'll leave it there and open it up to discussion. Thank you.
Well, I think there's dramatic change in who becomes students, all right? Because at one time, to be a student at a university was very privileged, and it required a lot of money, and there wasn't a whole lot of universities out there. But after World War II, there was a huge expansion. The economy was booming, and so they began the state colleges just building right and left. Now they call them universities. What's in a name? But what really survived, and a lot of, how do you say it? At one time, students were used as scabs. You know, the football team or whatever at Berkeley, where there was the old days before or after World War I, they were brought out to fight the strikers. But I think to skip ahead to the 50s, pretty much the movements were crushed by the red baiting and the colleges were purged, but the one thing that survived was the civil rights movement. That couldn't be shut down, and we see all this bravery and courage, Montgomery boycotts and such, and then you have SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, comes up. And I think my experience is that students weren't so very brilliant. They were just getting drafted for the Vietnam War, all right? But the big sparks for the organizing of students and for democratic society was the people that came up from Mississippi Summer, who were experienced in the civil rights movement, and then they came north and began these movements like Students for Democratic Society. For example, up in San Francisco, when the old SDS office was on Howard Street, one floor above was the mime troupe, San Francisco mime troupe. You're talking about art and students, and then we see what his name is, I'm trying to think, they used to go, it became El Campesino Teatro.
Luis Valdez.
Right, Luis Valdez. So there became the student movement was very isolated from the working people. For example, World War I, the movement was much broader for anti-war, but it was a working class movement, a movement of immigrants, right? Jews, Italians, Germans, you know, people just hated the war. It was an imperialist war, but it was a working class movement, not a student movement. But the civil rights movement, again, who survived the red baiting? It was the civil rights movement. And then that began the transformation in the student movement of the 60s. The student movement of the 60s began, it fell apart by 1973. As the Vietnam War ebbed, so did the student movement. I think SDS was probably done by 71. And you're seeing this other movement into, what's causing these wars? All right, but the heritage, as you're talking about, here, for example, and within the unions, you saw a big push against the Latin American interventions. They had the Latin American solidarity things. But I think I just want to diverge for one point, and that's for Monterey County history and MPC history, Monterey Peninsula College. It was a premier institution when it began. Hartnell was first, and by the way, after the letter strike of 36 in Salinas, they would have a student newspaper at Hartnell, and these student newspapers are very important because that exactly showing what you're thinking or what you're talking about. They did a poll, and in this right-wing ag community, everybody went for Roosevelt, and some people, students, even voted for the communists at the time in the 36 election or 38, 36 I think it is. But here at MPC, and it ties right into the Peace Center, you got Judy Karras, who was one of the founders, and I think she's listed here. Her and Harlow, Catherine Harlow, and some of the other women, and of course the Karras family is something else, and then returning Vietnam veterans. This is 69 in the moratorium, all right? And they mobilized 2,000 people, all right, for Colton Hall. That ain't too shabby. That's not bad. So the movements are different from the community colleges to the four-year colleges, all right? But back then we called them junior colleges. But there was, how do you say it? Again, one of the things I saw about the SNCCs, the people coming back, these guys were battle hardened after coming up from the South, white and black, is they didn't care what you called yourself. You know, there's 16 kinds of communist groups or who knows, student groups or what, they didn't care. Let's get together. And they did community outreach. You know, tremendous amount of community outreach to the other, the four-year colleges have more, how do you say it, facilities. They've got more money. They've got bigger, as you say, the auditoriums and this and that and the other. But what you saw was these SNCCs are reaching out to all the other groups, you know. Anyway, I think what the students are doing now, and I'm not sure, I don't quite understand it. It's and one reason people ain't marching is, hell, my feet gave out, man. Can't do it no more. But students now, I think we need to take a look, and as exactly you said, and the communities, the general public, is just looking at these people getting the snot, I mean, just genocide.
Ken, you gotta give us a little time for.
All right, I'm sorry, I got on my soapbox.
No, thank you for.
But been there, done some of that,
Yeah.
and take a look at what happened just around here, and it's documented in the newspapers and the student newspapers, so it wasn't just a four-year crowd.
Oh, for sure, yeah. No, I mean, no, but thanks for that history. There's a lot that you know, I have to learn about that. But you know, so some of this, like at least my experience at UC Santa Cruz was that we didn't really encounter, you know, people from SNCC. I mean, at Berkeley they were there, but I mean, UC Santa Cruz was more isolated. So what we saw was you know, more organic and coming out of students.
With their draft test classification.
Yeah, no, I mean, so I mean that is a big thing for the Vietnam was the draft, and you know, we had a number of you know, cases, rallies of against the draft, and so that, no, for sure that was a big factor.
Go further, elaborate on one point you made. What brings students out to protest? And in my experience at Ivy League undergraduate college in 1966 to 70, they came out, they were mostly white. There was very, very little diversity. They came out because this was an issue that was directly impacting them. They had draft numbers. There was a lottery. These were people that could be killed. Their lives were at stake. They did not come out, well, the civil rights was a little bit earlier, and you could get killed just going down to the South and going on a freedom ride. Not that many of us were that brave. But by the time college came around and your friends' draft numbers were coming up, that's what I believe drove all these affluent young white people into the streets. And they would not stop. I remember marching in Washington a number of times, and the artwork was amazing. They had something, I don't know if you remember, the Bread and Puppet Theater, where they had these enormous two-story high caricatures of Nixon and Uncle Sam, and the artwork was tremendous.
Yes, no, agreed. No, so absolutely, the role of the draft was pivotal in the student movements of the late '60s, and the early '70s.
Education was damn near free.
Yeah.
Hey, Sharat, thanks so much for sharing your insight on this. I think another thread that I think is important to kind of weave into this narrative is the Occupy movement, because I think the encampments at the universities now are drawing from that legacy, like the occupation as a tactic and also as a kind of an organizational form, and kind of becomes about reclaiming space, imagining the world we want to make, creating different ways of relating to each other in that space, while also hopefully, you know, oftentimes, yeah, it's like in the plaza at a university, or, you know, a park in New York, or we had a little one here in the park here, but so it does still kind of take up space. And also I think that even preceding that was the student movement in 2009, 2010, 2011, when I just happened to be a student, and there were people occupying buildings at mostly UCs. And of course that happened, of course, in Columbia, the big Columbia occupation back in the kind of 68 or 69, I think. But anyway, I think that's another interesting thread to bring in there. And I think that is an interesting thread. Plus, I think the thread that you brought up, which was the kind of Black Lives Matter movement, Trayvon Martin into the Ferguson, into George Floyd protests, because that, I think, really woke up a whole generation of people, I think even younger than me. I'm now old enough to say people younger than me. Because it got people thinking about race, imperialism, colonization, and that's like such a clear part of what's going on with Zionism and the assault on Palestinians, right? It's like, some Europeans came and took some people's land, and it's so obvious to people who woke up from the kind of Black Lives Matter movement and are thinking about, and also Standing Rock, I think, is another thread, thinking about indigenous struggles here. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there, a few more threads to kind of weave in, because I think that's pretty big, just based on the folks that I'm meeting with. I'm involved with the Monterey Palestine Solidarity Collective, and also some of the student organizing at campus, which is small. But anyway, these are some of the other things that I think are kind of adding to the legacy, and they all build, right? It's like we're learning from the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, and all the other things that you brought up, and some of the other ones I'm bringing in. So anyway, a couple more things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're absolutely right. That everything builds on the previous layer, and the Occupy movement is it's about reclaiming space. It's also about consensus and real grassroots democracy, and so there's a lot that we almost take for granted today that came from Occupy. And the other thing that I wanted to just mention, because it comes from my experience, was to see Occupy on a grand scale, which was during the Arab Spring in Tahrir Square, where once Tahrir Square was captured by the protesters. So there was an attack on the square on the 2nd of February 2011, and that was by the government supporters, they say Mubarak's supporters. Came in on horseback and on camel, and they charged the square, and a number of people were killed that day. And so the response of the protesters who were occupying Tahrir was to seal it off. So they made a barricade around this gigantic space. It's not really a square; it's actually a giant roundabout that has 9 major streets coming into it. And they put up a barricade around it using corrugated sheet metal and other structures, and they had these entrance points, or what do you say, checkpoints. And to enter the square, all they were interested in was show your ID. I don't know how useful that is to sort of weed out police and secret agents, but we were asked to show our ID, our photo ID, and then we had a pat down to make sure that we weren't carrying any weapons. And so from February 3rd onwards, Tahrir Square was a weapons-free zone. Not only that, but it was about reclaiming space. It was about people taking care of that space, sweeping it, at the end of the day, and about safety for women. And this is unheard of in the Egyptian context, because women, routinely are harassed in Egypt. It's just that, that kind of society. And Tahrir was, no woman, after that point, no woman was harassed or inappropriately touched or called in Tahrir Square. And so this reclaiming space was about creating a safe space, about in a sense creating a new society, even if it's only temporary, you know, only in one location. But it's the same. It's you know, occupy on a grand scale, because at any given time there were no fewer than 20,000 people in the square, and when the square filled, you had what, 250,000, 500,000. So that was a very unique experience, and it will live with me forever. George.
I'm curious about what your perspective or your opinion is about mass media in relation to protests. It seems to me the 60s was unique because television was a new media format, and the horror of the Vietnam War was on your nightly news, and that would easily arouse some, you know, resistance to that. But now that corporate media seems to be dominating, and then also they've learned a lot of lessons about how to moderate their reporting so that it doesn't energize the protesters. I don't know. I'm just curious about what your perspective is on the mass media in relation to this subject.
Well, okay, so the Vietnam War was the first televised war, and it was viewed largely, although there were some exceptions, but it was viewed largely through reporters who were embedded in U.S. forces, and the images that caught the world were those few that were not embedded. You know, the naked girl and the civilian being shot by the Vietnamese general. Anyway, but the point is that the vast majority of the reporting on the Vietnam War as the first televised war was through the perspective of embedded reporters who therefore see it essentially through the eyes of the U.S. military. And that this is exactly the kind of reporting that Israelis see. Okay, if you look at Israeli television media, first of all, it's very minimal, but what they do have is through video footage that is not even done by Israeli reporters. It's video footage that is released by the IDF. And this is, of course, in total contrast to what you're seeing on Al Jazeera, which is day after day of what it is from the standpoint of civilians who are living in Gaza and you know, sheltering in hospitals and getting bombed in the evacuation areas like Al-Mawasi. And of course in between there have also been a lot of televised wars, right? To an extent more or less. I mean, the Afghanistan war, the Iraq war were all televised wars. The Ukraine war is something different, right? Because the Ukraine war is the first televised war which we have seen, or at least the West has seen, through the eyes, through the perspective of those who are under the Russian attack, because they're viewed from the Ukrainian side. There are almost no Western reporters who ever go to Donetsk or Lugansk or Crimea, right? And that, I mean, so I had a glimpse of this at the very beginning of the war, because you could still get RT for a few days before RT was cut off here. And then after that, it was interesting because the only media coverage we could get from Donetsk was by a reporter by the name of Gita Mohan, and she was reporting for India Today, and she was reporting from Kiev, and then she disappeared for 2 weeks. And what she had done is she had gone to Moscow to get permission to go to Donetsk, and then she showed up in Donetsk reporting from the front lines there. And it was you know, the same picture, in the sense that the people in Donetsk were getting bombarded by Ukrainian artillery, and their houses were being destroyed, they were being displaced, building, you know. But still, this destruction that you saw in Ukraine, whether it was done by the Russians or done by the Ukrainians, there's a hole in the building. There's a bunch of windows that are blown out. There's a fire. Okay, it's nothing compared to what you see in Gaza. And I don't see any reporters pointing this out. The reason is because the tonnage of bombs that Israel has dropped in Gaza, right now I would estimate that what I'm doing is I'm extrapolating, because we had figures from about 3 months into the assault, and I'm extrapolating based on the assumption that the tonnage of bombs is much lower than it was at the very beginning of the assault, in October and November. And so the 3 months in, it was 70,000 tons of bombs had been dropped by Israel. So now I extrapolate that at a reduced rate to maybe about 100,000 tons. But in any case, you see that is almost twice the tonnage of bombs that the U.S. dropped in Afghanistan in 20 years. Okay? And it's about the same. It's almost twice the tonnage that has been dropped by both sides in the Ukraine war. Okay? Why? Because it's not because the number of bombs is so many, it's because of these bunker busters. So a bunker buster weighs, it's 2,000 pounds or maybe 3,000 pounds of explosives. And so when one of them hits at the base of a building, the entire building collapses, right? You have a big building, a 9-story building, the whole building collapses in one bomb. And that's why the level of destruction is so great. I just had to throw that in there.
Maybe more pros and cons of the current student movement?
Pros and cons. Well,
And what the fellow was talking about, the present student movement, how this
Yeah.
evolved?
Well, as I mentioned, the pros are that they're mobilizing on an issue that, so the Israel-Palestine issue has always been, we've always been fighting this issue of progressives being PEP. We call them PEP because progressive except Palestine. So we get, and this is still true of basically the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is more or less progressive, at least certainly on domestic issues, but it's bad on war, as we saw from the debate last night. There is a broad mobilization, both in the community and on the campus, on the issue of Palestine, and this is the first time this has happened. Nevertheless, these mobilizations are smaller than the mobilizations, in anticipation of the Iraq War, both of those wars, right? I mean, we haven't seen any protests in San Francisco of 200,000, 250,000, right? So the biggest we've had is about 50,000 in San Francisco, twice. So we're still dealing with PEP. But so anyway, so I'm saying that the student movement has come into a terrain that we haven't been to before, and encountered a lot of pushback. Why? Because a lot of these universities, they look at these university administrators. I mean, why was Stanford so intensely? They had a deadline to take down the encampment at Stanford in advance of the family weekend, because they didn't want the parents to see the encampment, and because the alumni donations, the donations from Zionists are big donations. And so there's a very concrete reason why Stanford wanted to take down the encampment. But students resisted.
How many campuses do you think had the encampment?
Well, the bigger, the residential campuses, okay, so this is why you didn't have encampments on the community colleges, right? And so the more residential they were, the higher probability that they would have an encampment and be able to sustain it for a longer time. But all of the big campuses, so there's also the critical mass. So I've been to a number of, not that they didn't have an encampment, but protests at De Anza College, because De Anza is a big community college, okay, or San Francisco City College. That's a very big campus. But small campuses like, I don't know whether you even know about it, but in Santa Clara there's a college called Mission College. It's very small. San Jose City College is very small. And a lot of classes are online nowadays, so students don't even come to campus. And those campuses, there's no chance of even organizing. It's hard to even organize a protest, let alone an encampment.
How many of these bigger campuses do you think had the encampments? The four-year universities?
Well, I mean, I only know about the Bay Area. I haven't been keeping track of what's happening in Southern California. I mean, other than the big news at USC, UCLA, but we had, so we had at UC Santa Cruz, UC Berkeley, UCSF, even though UCSF was not really big, USF, San Jose State, San Francisco State, but there was nothing at Cal State East Bay, right? So, but it has to do with also, how much politicization there is on these campuses, and also the fact that Cal State has almost, I don't know if it even has any student residences. I don't think there are any residential students.
I saw a list that looked like there was maybe over 100 across the country.
Over 100?
I mean, yeah, I saw a long list of all the universities that were participating. I don't know if they were all doing camp out or just doing protests, but there were protests on, probably over 100.
Yeah, easily there were 100. It would be 100 encampments. But in terms of protests, yeah, it's even more. Yeah.
Do you
So-
think the current wave of students' protest on the Gaza issue would move the political needle a little bit so that the current administration or future administration will change their foreign policy a little bit?
Absolutely, but it's not just the student movement. Okay, so definitely the movements, the protests after October 7th have definitely moved the needle. You can even see that in the pronouncements of the Biden administration, right? So because before there was no talk, they refused to talk about a ceasefire, and the needle has moved to the point where Biden is urging some kind of a ceasefire. It's just unclear, how permanent it would be. But unfortunately, it still does not move the needle very much in terms of U.S. supplying arms to Israel and giving substantive support to the Israeli state. But to the extent that the needle moves, it brings us. It makes it conceivable that we can bring about a significant change of policy. It's a process. It's going to take time.
When you see 1,000, I've seen on TV 1,000 students wearing some sort of Palestinian thing at their graduation. Maybe they didn't encamp it. But I'm just seeing there's got to be a long-term impact. Some of this is at Harvard, the Ivy League schools, as well as out here. A loss of the intelligentsia, a section of the intelligentsia. This is not as big as, say, Vietnam, but this has got to be significant. I'm just interested in what people think how that's going to play out.
Well, there are a number of things that are happening, right? right? So yes, it's true that you have this unprecedented number of students who are aware of Palestine. There were other issues in the Middle East. They have established connections. They have friends who are Arabs or Palestinians. There's a demographic change because the number of Muslims, the number of Palestinians in this country has risen, very substantially. And this, of course, we're seeing it's playing out in the polls in Michigan because Dearborn actually has a population there is a majority Muslim and Arab. And you have similar things happening like that in places like Houston, New York. Although New York is also a bedrock of Zionism.
Right.
But things are changing, and we found a lot of solidarity, at least in San Jose, a lot of solidarity coming from Latino, Latinx population. So I think this, so I mean, what I see here is that anyone who does not view things through a settler colonial lens is going to be swayed in some way, and this is exactly the divide that we're seeing internationally. It's just like Europe, the fact that the settler colonial countries, Germany, France, Britain, Italy, are supporting Israel and Ireland. Although Spain is an exception, but Ireland, is because Ireland was the colonized, right? It was under British colonialism from what, 1200. So that's why I think that things are changing. But it's, as you say, it's going to be about moving the needle, but we'll see a change. Thank you.
I think that what you say about the Western European powers, it's not just, I don't think, the colonial experience, but it's also the World War II experience.
Absolutely.
And the Holocaust experience. And the Zionist support was so strong immediately following World War II because of the Holocaust. And those countries lived with it. They lived with the war much more than we did. They lived with the creation of the State of Israel. It wasn't viewed as colonial in those days, but rather the remnant of the Jews should have a place. Only to the peoples whose place they were taking was the colonial thing primary.
Right.
But with the history, time goes on. The people who were alive then, they're dying out. And all you see is the evil of Zionism as a colonial thing, not how it got so strong in Western Europe, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's precisely why Germany has a, is more willing to ban pro-Palestine protests. It's because of it's partly a guilt complex. It's partly because of the denazification process, and but that's absolutely a factor. But as you say, things will normalize over time. We're going to see more things eventually will be put into perspective. Judy?
Yeah, in the 80s in Central America, there were terrible things going on in El Salvador and in Guatemala and Honduras, and there was a Central American solidarity group locally. Was there anything going on that you're aware of up in the Bay Area?
Sure, we had, in San Jose, there was a group called LACES, Labor, I don't remember exactly, Labor Committee on El Salvador. There's the, I don't remember all the names, but I have friends in many of them. So they were, I mean, and of course in Berkeley there were plenty of groups that were, you know, doing Latin America solidarity, Central America solidarity work.
Any thoughts on the BRICS alliance and how that might what that might mean for the future of peace?
Well, excellent question. So I think, well, so the for the United States, it is, you know, this is about what the U.S. is struggling for is ways to sustain U.S. hegemony. The U.S. is the sole superpower on the planet, and it has done so through a number of means, not just military superiority, but also through control of the dollar and maintaining the dollar as the world's reference currency. And this monopoly of the dollar has been historically, you know, so overwhelming. I mean, this is ever since Bretton Woods, 1944. That the U.S. dollar is the world's reference currency. It is the currency of investment. So when you look at markets, if you're Saudi Arabia and you have some surplus and you want to invest it somewhere, where do you invest it? You don't actually have much choice. You know, you could invest it in Frankfurt, you can invest it in Tokyo, but if you have $1 trillion, there is no market that's deep enough to take $1 trillion of investment, right? Except the U.S. So the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ, these are the really, you know, big markets. They dwarf any other markets. And so these are factors that give the U.S. this dominance, and also this ability to have enormous amounts of deficit spending without the U.S. dollar going down. And so the U.S., because all these transactions, 88% of currency transactions in the world involve the U.S. dollar on one side or the other of the transaction. 88%. That's how dominant the U.S. dollar is. And it confers a lot of advantages, like just because of the volume. If you want to change currency, the spread, which is the amount of the banks charge to do that transaction, is much smaller if you're trading dollars than it is any other currency. Anyway, so this dominance means that the U.S. can control trade by banning a country from the banking system, the system through which international transfers are made between one country and another. And mainly that's SWIFT, which is based in Switzerland, but it's denominated in dollars. And the U.S. Justice Department exercises a right of control over anything. And this is a part of the U.S. exercise of extraterritorial jurisdiction to control any kind of dollar transaction through SWIFT. And so the BRICS are, among other things, are looking at ways to provide alternatives to the U.S. dollar. And so they're actively talking about some kind of a currency, whether it is a combination of currencies or maybe a new currency eventually. Something like the euro, which the U.S. would have no control over, which would allow countries that are under sanctions, so Russia, Iran, China to some extent, North Korea, that these countries would be able to freely trade and
Their own clearinghouse.
their own clearinghouse, right? Their own clearinghouse, their own currency, and also freeing it from the U.S. dollar because then if you free it, if you can somehow free it from the U.S. dollar, you free it, you free them to some extent from the volatility of world markets that are under U.S. jurisdiction. So, for example, I'll give you an example. So the reason that Cuba is having tremendous economic problems right now is because ever since the abolition of the dual currency, that is, Cuba used to for many years had two currencies, had a Cuban peso and a peso convertible, which is the convertible peso. So that was a way of saying that, okay, there's one currency system for foreigners and people who want to trade, and also foreign tourists, and there's another currency system for Cuban citizens to buy their basic essentials. And they decided, for a number of reasons, because it's cumbersome, it's confusing, to eliminate the dual currency. So then what that does is that leaves the Cuban peso alone to interface with the world markets. And the world markets are capitalist markets. And they value currencies in part because of the systems that they're attached to. If you're attached to a socialist system, world markets, world capitalist markets will systematically devalue that currency, make them worthless. And that's why Cubans don't have any purchasing power right now, because the peso has been devalued from 25 to the dollar to 350 to the dollar. Okay. So anyway, so one of the things that BRICS is trying to do is to create an alternative, monetary system, trading system. The other thing that's happening is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and I believe that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is sort of, in terms of membership, is a precursor for the BRICS. And it's very interesting, and it underlines a principle of external relations that China has enunciated. I mean, China was the founding, the country that convened the first Shanghai Conference that led to the creation of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And China has enunciated this policy that they're interested in having good economic relations with everyone, so that everyone can benefit. And even though China does a few things that are like a bit like a bully, because it has the military force, for example, the invasion of Vietnam in 1980, what it's doing in the Paracel Islands and in the West China Sea, are questionable. But in terms of the economic relationship, what the experience of the African countries in the Brick and Road, and they're seeing that China is opening up economic opportunities without political strings attached. And so what the Shanghai Cooperation Organization did is it brought together a lot of countries. Initially it was Russia, China, and the Central Asian countries, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and so forth, and has expanded enormously. And then 2017, two enemies, India and Pakistan, joined. And then recently, I think it was last year or the year before, Iran and Saudi Arabia joined. And then this was, of course, connected to China mediating a peace as well as diplomatic relations between between Iran and Saudi Arabia, so which is a major breakthrough. Anyway, so what I'm saying is that the membership of the SCO the Shanghai Cooperation Organization has expanded. It includes not only Russia, but now Ukraine has joined. So the two enemies have joined. And the list goes on. So I see that, you know, that there are other powers in the world that are backing away from this sort of this U.S. Perspective of polarization, of dividing the world between allies and enemies, you know, or dividing the world between so-called liberal democracies and so-called authoritarian states, okay, and so anyway, I see. I think it's good that there are alternative centers of power, and that countries in the world can find ways of trading and circumventing unilateral sanctions. The only sanctions that should ever be allowed are those that are voted on by the UN Security Council. There should not be. Unilateral sanctions should be illegal.
And how can we go see the posters that you were talking about, the art, activist art? Is it on display in San Jose at the Peace Center all the time, or?
It hasn't. It hasn't been on display there since it was. We opened it in 2010, and no, it was on display there once when it was a small collection, as it was here. It was on display right here in this room. I don't remember what year that was, maybe 2011. But no, we'd love to bring it back, but we need a bigger space.
Put it online.
Well, some of them are online. If you go to you look up the special collections at San Jose State University, the San Jose State University Library special collections.
What would you suggest is the greatest approach for young generations to mobilize for Palestine to the same capacity and point of efficiency that they did during the Vietnam War?
Well, I don't. First of all, I don't know that the mobilizations for the Vietnam War were necessarily more efficient. I'm not sure what we're trying to optimize here. But in terms of maybe in terms of effectiveness, I mean, I already gave one recommendation is that we have to create circumstances which facilitate communications, which facilitate getting the message out, and also clarifying the message. See, for example, I mean, this is not limited to the student movement, right? So there are a lot of Palestine protests, you know, which have the slogan, which has become controversial for reasons that we'll get into, you know, from the river to the sea. What does it mean? What does it mean to a Palestinian? What does it mean to an Israeli? Why is there controversy over this? Well, first of all, for a Palestinian, right? Remember, a Palestinian looks at this as what was the situation before British imperialism, before British colonialism? Well, under the Ottoman Empire, all the different peoples in Palestine, so this includes Jews, Christians, Muslims, Druze, Bedouins, they all lived side by side, and they were free to move about, to live in anywhere within Palestine, right? Or even to cross, to cross a border, because in those days borders were, before, well, and in the Ottoman times there weren't such hard borders, right? And so people could move from Palestine to Jordan, they could move from Jordan to Lebanon and so forth. So this freedom of movement, so what we're talking about when we say from the river to the sea is about freedom of movement, freedom to return to where people, you know, where they lived before, where they had their ancestors, right, or what was their former home. And that this land is shared. So for a Palestinian, it's okay for Jews to actually live in a settlement, even in the West Bank. The only thing is that there has to be equality. You cannot have settlers coming in and expelling Palestinians from their homes. That's unacceptable. That's unacceptable in any country, anywhere in the world. If you have two people living as equals, they can live side by side. And there's nothing that says that the West Bank is exclusively Palestinian. And so from the river to the sea is about sharing the entire land from the river to the sea. So that anyone Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Druze, Bedouin can live anywhere. For an Israeli Zionist, from the river to the sea is about exclusion. It's about pushing the Jews into the sea. Okay, because of the framework is the framework of apartheid. It's not about two people living side by side, but living separately. And that's not what Palestinians want. No, nobody has. I've never heard a Palestinian, whether it's here or in Palestine, talk about pushing Israelis into the sea. I've never heard that. And so there's a need to clarify what is meant by from the river to the sea or from the sea to the river. So this is one of my critiques. There are a lot of these misunderstandings we can clear up if we explain exactly what we mean. But most of the protests do not attempt to explain what we mean by these slogans.
It's more of an idea or suggestion, but on Tuesday I went to Oakland to a film screening about Palestine. It's called Where Olive Trees Weep. It's a really good film. And I was thinking that I would love to showcase that somewhere here in the Monterey County to again kind of allow the community and students to learn more about the experience of Palestinians. It really humanizes them and it showcases both sides because they have people who were formerly Zionists or understand the Zionism and they're speaking in the film. There's also a trauma expert, Dr. Gabor Mate, who's talking about just the experience of trauma and what that means to human beings. So yeah, I think it would be a great way to show in a beautiful way, right, what is happening, because I know when I'm watching online it's very horrific, and I can see why it pushes people away from seeing that, but this is a very more softer tone and it's very it's a documentary, and it's not putting either side down, it's just trying to really gain an understanding, and I just think it would be a great way to again kind of get clarity on what the issue is, because I feel a lot of people get lost with the emotion or trying to pick a side, and it's can we just get an understanding?
Absolutely, yeah. No, it is a great film. I haven't seen it yet. I'm going to see it
It's amazing.
tomorrow. I think tomorrow night I'm going to see it because it's going to be shown in San Jose. And so actually we have a film series in San Jose on Palestine. And so I think there are 5 or 6 films in this for the summer. And they will be shown at the at the Arab American Cultural Center in San Jose. But no, I mean, so definitely we should talk about bringing these films here. There's also I'm also very close to a couple of Palestinians who just returned from the West Bank, and they went to the West Bank just a couple months ago to accompany Palestinians who are being attacked by settlers. This is south of Hebron, and so there's a first-hand. They can do a first-hand report on what they experienced, and it's really outrageous what they saw.
Any more questions?